Hi, it's just Rachel here again. Today I want to talk a little bit about reasonableness. Are Jehovah's Witnesses reasonable? Now, they like to think they're reasonable, and I certainly felt that I was a reasonable person. I know it's something that, when I gave consideration to this, it's something that helped me wake up. I realised that a lot of our reactions, our teachings weren't actually very reasonable at all. Anyway, I'd just like to start out by reading a scripture that we're all familiar with. In Philippians 4 verse 5, it says, "Let your reasonableness become known to all men." So clearly, witnesses should present themselves to those who are non-witnesses in a reasonable manner. They should appear to be reasonable. So what does reasonable mean? Well, I've looked at my dictionary. This is the Oxford Dictionary, and it says here, endowed with reason, reasoning, of sound judgment, sensible, moderate, not expecting too much, ready to listen to reason, agreeable to reason, not absurd, interesting word, within the limits of reason, not greatly less or more than might be expected. Okay, so very interesting definition there. And I'd also just like to read what our Insight volume says in volume 2 under reasonableness, and it actually has an entry there. It says the Greek word epiekes, which is translated reasonableness, has been defined as meaning seemly, fitting, hence equitable, fair, moderate, forbearing, not insisting on the letter of the law. It expresses that considerateness that looks humanely and reasonably at the facts of a case. Very interesting use of the word humanely there, isn't it? Okay, it goes on to say a little bit more and give some examples. Okay, so given these definitions of reasonableness, are Jehovah's Witnesses really reasonable? I can think of many areas where they're not. For example, shunning. Is shunning really reasonable? Is it reasonable to stop talking to somebody because they've offended you or they don't agree with one of your opinions? Is it really reasonable? I don't think most normal people would think it is. I'm thinking now of the shunning videos. The convention, we had the video where the young sister committed fornication and she was disfellowshipped, and then she went for 15 years or plus another year where she was seeking reinstatement, where she had no contact whatsoever with her family, and that was the video that showed the mother refusing to answer her phone calls. So is that really reasonable? I mean, just think, if this young sister didn't return to the organisation, say she just didn't believe in it anymore, is it really reasonable that her family would not speak to her again for the rest of her life? I mean, that seems a little bit heavy-handed. It goes against what that definition, the definition in the dictionary talking about moderate and fitting, and it's a little bit over the top. You think of someone perhaps who's disfellowshipped for smoking, because before the 1970s, smoking was okay. But after that, if you were smoking, you would be disfellowshipped. Now, say that one never went back to the organisation. Is it reasonable that their family and their friends who are witnesses would never ever speak to them again or have any contact with them whatsoever? Again, that seems a bit overkill to me. That doesn't seem reasonable or fair or fitting. It's like the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and we all know how we were taught that Jehovah punishes to the proper degree, like for like. So it just doesn't seem very reasonable to me. Anyway, we also had another video, as if the video at the convention wasn't enough. We had another video in the November broadcast, and this time it shows a young brother who clearly he's not very happy with being a witness, and he's probably withdrawn from his family a little bit. Then one day he packs up all his belongings and leaves a note for his parents. And then you see the next thing him being announced at the meeting as no longer being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So it doesn't say here whether he was disfellowshipped or disassociated. It could have been that he just disassociated, that he perhaps didn't believe anymore, didn't believe in the organisation, or believe that the governing body was being directed by Jehovah, or perhaps he didn't believe in the Bible, or God even. Is it really reasonable to shun someone for the rest of their life? Because if that's the case, if someone doesn't believe, they're not going to come back, are they? Unless you offer really good proof, but obviously they haven't found that evidence required for them to believe. So, I mean, is it reasonable to stop having any contact with that person whatsoever when they leave? It doesn't seem very reasonable to me. Another thing I wanted to mention too, the video at the convention about the sister who was disfellowshipped. In that video, it was her that was kind of narrating the video. And she talked about how she didn't give any thought to how heartbroken her parents would be about her, being doing the things that led to her being disfellowshipped. But it also showed in the video that she was having some, well, obviously doubts or things, she wasn't feeling that good about the truth. But she felt she couldn't talk to anyone about it. So something's wrong there. Why did she not feel like she could talk to her parents about her feelings? I mean, the obvious answer to that is that fear of ultimately being shunned, so the threat and fear of being shunned and losing your family probably stops a lot of young ones from actually approaching their parents for help when they need it. So, and another issue I had with that video was that it sort of made her, the child, responsible for her parents' happiness, because she talked about, I didn't even think about how heartbroken they'd be, and it caused all this pain. So what lesson does that teach children? That if you want to leave the organisation, or if you commit a sin and get disfellowship, you are responsible for your parents' unhappiness. Now that is not a good message. Not a good message at all. So yeah, there are a few issues with that video. I can only imagine that the governing body have made these videos because perhaps a lot of witness parents are following their gut instinct and their intuition and continuing to, have some dealings with their disfellowshipped children. Which is only natural, isn't it? It's a natural thing to do, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, very unreasonable. I've made some brief notes here. I've got them stuck on the window because I know I'm going to forget stuff. Okay, yeah. Another thing I was going to bring out too, which I thought Robin from What's Up Watchtower YouTube channel, I thought she made a good point. She talked about shunning, how shunning someone isn't going to make them change their belief system. You can shun someone who's left all you like, but if they just don't believe in the governing body anymore, they don't believe they're God's channel, it could even go further, they don't believe in the Bible, you can't make them believe by emotionally blackmailing them. It just doesn't work. And those that do come back, oftentimes it's not because they're coming back to Jehovah, it's because they want their families back. So it's very unreasonable to think that shunning, when someone is shunned, they don't feel like it's love. In that November broadcast, the advice to parents was to not stand between Jehovah's loving discipline and the one who's been disfellowshipped. And they stressed that the disfellowshipping is a loving thing from Jehovah. But when you are shunned, there's nothing remotely loving about it. You don't feel loved. You don't think, oh gosh, they care about me so much because they're ignoring me and treating me like I'm invisible. No, that shunning is inhumane. It makes you feel abandoned, rejected. It makes you feel like you're a really wicked person. It certainly doesn't make you feel like going back to the very people that are making you feel that way, making you feel hurt and abandoned. And of course, you know, for some, it leads to, especially for those perhaps that do believe that it is Jehovah's organisation, they feel deeply ashamed, they self-condemned, they may feel, what's the point, they might as well be as reckless as they like, you know, they get into very self-destructive habits. So in every way, I think shunning is actually quite counterproductive. It doesn't really get people back, unless it's for the wrong motives anyway. So it's really quite crazy. Absurd, as one of the definitions in the dictionary said, that something reasonable is not absurd. I thought it was a good word. But some of the teachings and ideas that witnesses have are really absurd. They're not sensible. Okay, so that's one area. I think I've covered all the points that I was going to mention about shunning. The other thing is, witnesses are told or taught to put all their trust in the governing body. Literature has said that Jesus and Jehovah trust the governing body, so you should also trust them. Ooh, what a presumptuous statement to make. Okay, so you may think, oh no, they don't expect us to trust them, but they do. Often the literature says things that if you want any hope of salvation, you have to work alongside and be supportive of Christ's brothers, who are represented by the governing body. So you're expected to bow down to them and just go along with everything they say. And I don't know how many of you remember from the November study watchtower. November, did I say the year? 2013, where it said that you must be prepared to obey any direction essentially from the governing body, transmitted through the elders, even if it seems impractical, and also if it seems to be unsound and not strategic, you know, from a human standpoint. So they're expecting you to follow direction even if it seems unsound. Now does that seem reasonable? I don't think so. Especially given that the February 2017 Watchtower magazine study edition, it has a paragraph in there which says that the governing body are not inspired or infallible, and that they make errors in their scriptural interpretations, or, you know, in doctrinal scriptural matters, and in their organisational directions. So they admit they make mistakes. Yet in that November issue from 2013, they said, be prepared to follow any direction that they give because your life depends on it. So, I mean, does this really seem reasonable?